Hello, friends. How are you doing? Welcome to Cultivate Your Mental Wealth. My name is Joyce Ozeh, and I am a civil rights attorney in Chicago, but I am also a mental health advocate, and I have lived experience with anxiety and depression specifically. What does that mean, and why do I bother sharing that? It means that I have lived with anxiety and depression, and all the things that we talk about are actual tools and resources I have used to navigate wellness for myself. And I am so passionate and committed about navigating wellness for my community because wellness is possible. And the reason we call it mental wealth, it's that wellness isn't just for us. We were designed to live and to give in the overflow. So as we're getting well, let's help the other people around us to get well through conversations, resources, abundance, all of the above. It's so possible. I see that some of y'all have already started to do this, but as you know, I love interacting with you. So please let me know where you're tuning in from, where you're watching from, how you've been. Ursuline, so nice to see you. Good evening, good evening. Welcome to the conversation. But yes, please rep your city. So, as an overview, I want to do some more audience check ins. I will be monitoring the chat, so continue to let me know where you're tuning in from. Also, today is a new part of our series, and I like to call it kind of like an end of the year review, along with preparing our minds for the new year. So, we'll be going into part one of this two-part series, which is just an end of the year review. I also want to later talk about what you can expect next. And I want to leave us with some practical pushes so we're not just talking about these things, but we're able to practically apply the things that we discuss. As always, if you're feeling a little shy and you don't want to drop a comment, you know where to find me. I first want to thank all of my friends, I call y'all family low-key, for communicating with me via email. I promise I'm going to have a listener dedicated session where I dedicate an entire episode based on conversations with the permission of people, of course, conversations that we've had offline in the chat. So if you'd like to be featured or if there's just something that you want to discuss, please email me. comethrive247@gmail.com. That's comethrive247@gmail.com. Just like the comments, my team, monitor that email, and I help give any kind of coaching for navigating the employment space and mental wealth and mental wellness, navigating boundaries in your relationship. All of this advice is free. And I just want it to be my gift to you, my listeners, my family, as we navigate all of this together. So if you don't want to comment, feel free to email. I'll be looking out for it. I hope that sounds good. But okay, let's get into the main segment of our show. And for those of you who are new here, what I like to do before getting into the discussion is I like to set the room. The reason I like to do that is we all have busy lives. Most of us are coming back from work. Most of us are maybe working remotely. Some of us are stay-at-home parents. Some of us just need a break before we pivot into heavy discussion. So this is what I call setting the room. We take a deep breath. We allow what has been going on throughout the day, the volatility of our emotions, the potential chaos, the ups, the downs, and we put that aside. We take up space in this room. This is our conversation. Sometimes I'll have a guest. Sometimes I'll be talking to you like this. But more than anything, I want you to know that this is our conversations. We can lay aside what we've been going through, or we can bring it to this space. You are safe here, you are seen here, and you are valued here. Thank you so much for being with us. Okay, now that we've set the room, let's go into what we want to talk about today. And that is the year in review and how we actually prepare ourselves for the new year. I'll tell you, I love New Year's because I love the idea of a fresh start. I like the idea of leaving some things behind. I just like the idea that all things can be made new in the new year. And I get the opportunity to be an even more self realized version of myself. But sometimes the new year can be daunting. How many of you get kind of overwhelmed when it talks about goal setting or people are talking about new year, new me, or like, let's make all these resolutions? How many of you are still beating yourself up for the resolutions that you may have made for 2023 that you broke in February or that you never even started? The gym memberships, the books you plan to read, the changing your job or eating more healthy, seeing a therapist. I want you to know that because you are safe in this space, there is no judgment for what you could have done or what you wanted to do differently. And that's what's so exciting about a new year. But I also want to let you know that you don't have to wait for the new year for a fresh start. How many of you believe that? And I say that because getting into the space where you can set resolutions and goals for yourself, you first have to mentally be in that space. And that's why reflection is necessary before we even move to anything like goal setting, resolutions, or even just figuring out a plan or a map for the new year. Okay. So I want to do something a little different. I'm going to guide us through some exercises. I'll share some things that I've been wrestling with or some of my wins as we just work on what it looks like to kind of review our year. Again, before we can talk about where we're going, we need to reflect on where we've been, okay? And why reflect? We hear that a lot. Reflection allows us to recognize and understand our own personal growth. We as people tend to be very good at marking all the things that we haven't done versus thinking of all the ways that we have grown. One of my favorite things to remember is I may not be where I want to be, but I'm certainly not where I was. I may not be where I want to be, but I'm not where I was. And you cannot know how far you've come if you don't pause to reflect. So, reflection allows us to recognize our personal growth and allow that to be a celebration, allow that to give us momentum to move forward and to continue to develop. I was thinking about something at work where I was doing a lot of work that was just emotionally draining me. And from the beginning of the year, I was like, I'm just going to push forward. I can do this. I don't want to be emotional about it. I'm a Black woman in this space. I don't want to be the Black woman that's emotional about doing the tough work. So, for this entire year, in fact, for the past 2 years on the specific project, I have just pushed through. And it has come at the cost of my mental health. And I'm at the point where my body's like, my mind is like, Joyce, babes, you can't be doing this. You can't just be pushing through to prove something to yourself or to your supervisors or to your team. You need to reflect and be honest about where you're at. And I was a little bit discouraged that I was even bothered by this work. The work is difficult. It's emotionally taxing. As I've said to y'all, I'm a civil rights attorney. And that work just is inherently difficult. It just is. But I may not be where I want to be in terms of how the work affects me. But I paused and I realized, wait a second, I was able to set a boundary for myself recently where in the beginning of the year, I would get something related to this project. It would emotionally exhaust me. I would cry. I would be overwhelmed, but I would work through the weekend and I would turn it in. But now I was able to have a conversation and say, this isn't the type of work I want to be doing. I'm interested in all of these other areas of civil rights, but this type of work is traumatizing to me. There's a lot of vicarious trauma, and I need to set boundaries for this work. I advocated for myself, and I'm able to now navigate my workplace in a way that feels healthy. All of this to say that sounds like personal growth. I couldn't have that conversation before, but I'm able to have it now because it's where I want to be and it's how I envision my workplace being. And that's to say to you, reflect back on this year. Again, you may not have done all the things you set out to do, but what are the ways that you've been different? Ask yourself. Feel free to also share, but ask yourself, how am I doing this in a way that's different than I would have earlier this year? How am I now navigating this scenario? It's important to give yourself your kudos, to give yourself your flowers now, because again, reflection allows us to look at personal growth. I also want to talk about gratitude with reflection and just the power of gratitude to improve your mental wealth. Again, I cannot underscore enough how these may be buzzwords that you hear in social media or, with your friends, like practice gratitude. But what does that actually mean? And does it actually affect your mental health? 100% it does. 100%. So, studies have actually shown that gratitude enhances your positivity and your overall outlook. It has also been linked to reducing stress. Practicing gratitude can promote better sleep. And just going back to improved mental health, regular gratitude practice has been linked to reducing symptoms of depression. Joyce, how is that possible? Again, I can attest for this. Everything I talk about, I'm telling you, it is something that I've either studied deeply or I've practiced in my personal life. So I have an agenda. You can find it on Amazon. I might link it later, where before I have to write out what I have to do for the day, there's a section on the top that says, I am grateful for. So I technically cannot even start my day or get to my to-do list until I sit and reflect specifically on what I am grateful for. And it is something I've been doing for at least 6 months of this year. And the days that I sit in gratitude and reflect on what I'm grateful for, I find that I'm more energized and more ready to take on the tasks of the day because my mental framework has shifted from, I have this deadline assignment, it's coming up, man, that's tough. Or, oh my goodness, I didn't get my coffee in the morning. Or, my husband was snoring last night. Gratitude necessarily places us in positions of positivity. And what that does for your mind is it shifts the focus. Whatever you focus on grows. So if you begin your day focusing on something that is positive, studies have shown that it impacts the way you approach your work, the conversations you have with people, and the general framework of your thinking because you're starting from a place of positivity. This isn't an overnight thing. I encourage beginning with gratitude for a period of time until you change some of the neural pathways in your brain so that focusing and beginning your day in gratitude becomes more and more normalized for your everyday. And it's just another method of stress and depression reduction. And it's one that I can definitely attest to myself, amongst other tools and resources. So, gratitude. I also love just doing mental health evaluations at the end of the year. I encourage, as we've talked about over and over again, to connect with a therapist to just navigate and guide you through your mental health wellness. And also, along with that, and outside of that, you can also do your own mental health self check ins. And let me show you what that can look like. Because again, these are the things that I do, and I've had to do them, especially as work recently has been quite intense. I'll get an email, right? I will start to feel my heart pounding. Before I even consciously realize, hey, this work email is stressing me out, my body tells me, ooh, you're stressed. So what I do is I slow down. I can feel my heart pounding. And instead of telling myself, why are you stressed about this? What is going on? What is happening? I check in with myself. I close my eyes. I take a deep breath. And I speak to the irrational, emotional part of me. Nothing is wrong with her, but she's trying to tell me something. And when that email came in, what she may have been telling me is, I can't figure it out. Oh my gosh, what are they asking me? I can't figure that out. Or I can't do that. I don't have time to do that. What is going on? Or this is too hard. This is just too hard. And before I even open that email in this mental health check in, I tell myself, okay, you're saying that this is too hard. What is the email telling you? You're allowed to read the email once emotionally, then read the email again practically. Okay, it's asking you to do this by the end of the day. Do you have the capacity, time-wise, to get this done? If you don't, I give you permission to push back on that deadline. Ask them, is this a fixed deadline or a flexible deadline? If it's a fixed deadline, tell them this, and this is on my plate. How would you like me to prioritize this? So giving space to that fear so that you can counter it with practical next steps is a part of that self check-in. Another thing, you can't do it. You're not able to do it. Self check and reflect on all the times that you have been able to do difficult things in the past week, in the past quarter, in the past year. This reflection may not exactly fit into your work or your day to day, but the basic premise is true. You don't have to shoo away that first anxious thought or that first depressive thought. But the first thing you need to do, check in. How is this making me feel? Then counter it with steps or possible solutions. And if you can't do that by yourself, you're not alone. There's always therapy and resources for you. But that's part of the emotional and mental health self check-in. Also, maybe you start to get anxious when you're around social media. Maybe you do a self check-in and you feel that you get anxious or you get depressive or irritable when you're around certain people. This, again, is why reflection throughout the year is so important. Because if you look back at your year and say, at this part of the year, I was feeling a certain way and I was hanging out with that person a lot, maybe you need to reevaluate that relationship. Or at this part of the year, I felt awesome, I felt empowered, and I was working on this kind of stuff at work. Maybe you need to do more of that. Or maybe you need to introduce more of the things that rejuvenate or reinvigorate you. Take stock of what's been happening throughout your year and your mental and emotional response to those things, because it will help you as you reflect on the new year to figure out what to stop, what to continue, or what to introduce to your plans, to your resolutions. So yes, Mark is talking about gratitude. We have Dr. Rhonda. It's so good to see you. I always love hearing from you. And yeah, Mark is talking about those emails hitting hard with stress, especially before you leave for the day. So disrespectful. If you clock out at 5 and you got an email at 4:50, 4:45, disrespectful. We might talk about this in part 2 of our series, but it's so important to be able to identify for your own mental health what is urgent versus what is important, and how to prioritize based on what works for you, as opposed to always prioritizing what works for others. You're a valued member of whatever team or work environment that you're in, and there are ways to navigate this in a way that is healthy and mentally safe. We'll get to that in a little bit at a future series. I also think it's important to reflect on lessons learned and some of the things that you navigated just so that you can come to the place that you're at this part of the year. And I really hate to say this, but sometimes some of the biggest challenges produce the yield of the biggest growth. Sometimes the biggest challenges yield the biggest personal growth. And as y'all know, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I don't believe that God causes bad things to happen. I 100% believe that there are times where God allows things to happen that facilitate our growth in ways that otherwise would not have been facilitated. It doesn't mean that all bad things God plans so that you can grow. It does mean that God recycles our pain. So I want you to reflect on some of the challenges this year. Okay, how did you navigate them? You've survived 100% of your worst days. That's powerful. That's growth. That's capability. That's ability. Reflect on that because there's always going to be something to overcome. And if you don't stop and pause to reflect on your own personal growth, you won't be able to appreciate, again, like we said, how far you've come. There is a resilience that becomes developed when you go through personal, emotional, mental challenges. And I want you to pause, take inventory of that, and celebrate yourself. We'll get to that in a little bit. Celebrate the fact that you were able to overcome the challenges of this year. But you cannot appreciate that unless you reflect on that. The last part of this discussion that I really want to get into is just a way to be mindful as we close this year. There's something that I want to call the letting go ritual. The letting go ritual. And it's this concept that we are going to let go and release anything that is emotionally burdening us. This could be shame. I didn't lose the 30 pounds I was supposed to lose. I didn't get the promotion that I was sure I was going to get or that I should have applied for. I haven't bought the house. I got out of a difficult romantic relationship that I thought would last forever. I had to end a friendship that I thought would last forever. These are hypotheticals. I'm not divorcing my husband. I'm just giving examples of some of the things that you can practice letting go and what I'm calling the letting go ritual. The biggest thing that I just feel impressed to talk about is shame. Shame keeps us from realizing who we really are. Shame keeps us from getting to the place where we can live out who we really are. And my biggest hope for you in this year of review, in this reflection before the new year, is that you let go of the emotional burden of shame. You are not the worst thing you've ever done. You are not all those things that people have put on you. You may be struggling with mental health issues, but you are not a sickness. You are not a disease. You are experiencing things, but you don't have to personally identify with them. Let it go. Leave it in 2023. Better yet, it's December. Leave it in all the months prior. This can start today. You don't have to bring emotional burdens into the new year. You are able to relinquish and let it go. And some of you may want to let it go, but you're still struggling and wrestling with what happened or being hurt or hurting someone, hurting yourself. It's okay if you let it go in this conversation that we're having, and an hour later you start to feel guilty again, or at the end of the year, you start to feel shamed again. This is a practice and a process, and you are allowed to grow into letting things go. So I just want to introduce you to that concept so that you feel less burdened as you step into the new year and as you set goals for yourself. You do not have to be who you've always been. You are not the worst thing that you've ever done. And you are certainly not any of the labels that people place on you that do not resonate with who you truly are. Let it go. Let it go. Okay, so before we go into some of the other conversations, yes, I love what y'all are saying in the chat. Marcus, as you look back, you can see the hand of God in your life and you are thankful. Beautiful. And that is not to say, I'm sure that you haven't faced challenges or difficult things. What you're saying is that you're choosing to focus on the hand of God, how God recycled those difficult situations, the trauma and the pain, and how he's brought you to a different place. Some of you may be reflecting and think, well, I can't see the benefit of what I've been through. Don't force it. You don't have to. You're allowed to be frustrated and upset as you reflect on this new year. If you believe in God, I dare you to do this. Bring all your big emotions to him, your frustration, your disappointment, the anxiety you're feeling, your fear. Bring it to him in your reflection. He can handle your big emotions. They're not too much. You don't have to pretend to feel what you don't feel. And while you're bringing those things to him, also reflect on the things that are positive so that you can also balance those competing narratives and so that your mind can learn how to be in a place of gratitude, even despite all of the terrible things that may have happened and that you've overcome. But again, it's okay if you're not there yet. It's something that you can grow into. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for your comments. We are not done yet, so make sure that you continue to tune in. I just want to let you know what you can expect for next time. It is going to be part 2 of our wrap up. And more specifically, I want to talk about setting intentions for the next year and how to prepare your mind for the new year. Today, we talked about reflection, letting things go, forgiving yourself, celebrating yourself. But I also want to now, after we reflected and reviewed on the past year, how do we set intentions for the new year? So if you have any questions about what we've talked about today on the show, you can email me at comethrive247@gmail.com. That's comethrive247@gmail.com. But again, before you go, we're going to move into my favorite part of my conversations with y'all, and that is practical pushes so that we can practice what we've talked about in the show. So stay tuned for practical pushes. Again, this is a segment of the show where we get to talk about, okay, you reflected, all of these nice things, Joyce, what am I going to do with it? Let's get into how we can move practically with some of the things that we've discussed in the show. So, I am a real big proponent on reflective journaling. It's one thing to just sit and think about your year and how it's been and what you've overcome. It's another thing to write it down, to make it plain, and to document where you've been. Sometimes you have all these ideas in your head and you don't realize where you are, how far you've come until you've written it down and then read it back to yourself. It can be out loud or just sitting and reading on the bus on your way to work. But it is so important to see on paper how far you've come. I encourage you to go on Amazon, go to Target, go to a store and buy a journal and just document your thoughts, your feelings, and your experiences from this year. Some prompts that you can use are, what were my most challenging moments and how did I overcome them? What were my most challenging moments and how did I overcome them? Another prompt, what am I most grateful for this year? What am I most grateful for this year? Another thing that you can do practically is what I like to call a gratitude jar. Have y'all ever heard of this? Essentially, what you do is you write down the good things that have happened to you on a little piece of paper throughout the year. And you can do this in like on a Saturday, on a Sunday. Take 30 minutes, an hour just to write out all the good things that have happened to you throughout this entire year. And as you're working through January, every day, pull out one of those pieces of paper and just reflect. Reflect on how far you've come. Reflect on the victories. Reflect on the wins. Nothing is too big or certainly not too small. So that's a gratitude jar. One of my other personal favorites is a digital detox. Again, we are going to have a conversation in the new year about social media and your mental health. We've talked about it before, but let's talk about it more in depth outside of like the realm of youth. I really encourage digitally detoxing from social media. You don't have to delete all of your accounts. I personally check my social media account 2 to 3 times a week, oftentimes 1 to 2 times a week, and I'm not on it for more than 10 minutes at a time. This will really help reset your mind. It'll help stop the comparisons, and it will also help you guard your mind as you go into the new year. A lot of social media is things that are fed to you passively, and you can't always control what you're seeing. So think intentionally, whether it's completely being off social media until the new year or checking it only once a week. It's another practical way to reflect, to quiet the external noise, and to figure out where you've been and where you want to go for the new year. So those are just some of the tips that will help you as you reflect on your year. I hope you practice them, and I hope to see you for part 2 of the series in 2 weeks. Have the best time. Go thrive.